Thank you, Stanley.
Hey, hey everyone. Hey everyone. Hi, it's Naomi Wolf here with Daily Clout, and welcome. It's an exciting week. I have a really important announcement that I'm thrilled about. We raised money and built BillCam 3.0, which you can now use on the Daily Clout site. What is BillCam? To those of you who are new to our community, it's a way that we've put all state and federal legislation in the United States onto an easy to use, shareable, social media friendly platform. So you can be lobbyists and you can send bills to your friends, to your networks. You can tweet directly to the bill sponsor, to the rep. It's a fantastic tool for, boosting your democracy and your power in a democracy. And there's also really practical additional use that we've added. And those of you who are investors at any level, even just the most basic, a little bit from your paycheck every month, those of you who are working for nonprofits, those of you who just care about a certain specific issue, those of you in real estate, you can now get verticals. Meaning, what is a vertical? I didn't know either. You can enter the issue that you want to follow, whether it's reproductive rights or finance or real estate, and you can sign up for a very affordable $24.99, I believe it is, a month, to get push notifications into your inbox so that you can always be aware when there's new legislation around the issue that you care about on a state or on a federal level. So please tell your friends, tell your networks. We've been scrambling to be a scrappy startup for a couple of years now. We're gaining traction, but every one of those memberships, every one of those Patreon donations, and really this exciting ability to very affordably get the inside scoop on things you're invested in, real estate changes around your neighborhood, issues that are affecting your work if you work for a nonprofit or for an elected official. Those are now available to everyone, not just the insiders, not just people who can afford K Street lobbyists. So you're welcome, America. And thank you so much for continuing to support and follow Daily Clout. Before I read This Week in Congress, it's a really big week. I also wanted to say we've been following the Australian crisis, the wildfires, and I'll be creating a Daily Clout Australia. We've already begun with a couple of amazing essays, one of them by John D., who, thank you, Daisy says it's totally worth the membership. Thank you, Daisy. John D., an Australian environmentalist who confirmed that there are 8 water tankers that the U.S. Forestry Service has in waiting that the Australian government has not asked for. And that's really shocking because, as you probably know, 1 billion animals have been burnt up in the Australian wildfires, and thousands and thousands and thousands of hectares, acres of land burned, hundreds of homes destroyed, and human beings' lives lost. So we are honored to run that important essay, and please share it. If you're in Australia, if you have friends in Australia, please let people know. Another fantastic essay that we have is from Christian Brown, a graduate student. And this is an invitation to all of you. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a specialist. You just have to have an opinion and do a little bit of research. Send us your blogs, send us your op-eds. Christian Brown is a graduate student in Australia who wrote a fantastic essay about kind of human rights in Australia 101. What rights do you have? What rights are threatened? And we've really been tracking a very alarming kind of 360-degree look over the last week at a modern democracy that has been systematically weakened in ways that could happen to any of our democracies. So please stay tuned, Australia. Thank you for the 8,000 new followers from Australia, the 34,000 video views from Australia. Please support and mobilize for Daily Clout Australia. All right, so This Week in Congress, turning again to the United States. Hey, Barry. You know that the impeachment HRES 755, which we read a couple of weeks ago, was agreed to in the House, and it was walked over to the Senate. So I'm sure you're familiar with that. And if you want to know what the articles of impeachment actually said, we read them. They're in a video. Let me move on to a couple of really important bills that got passed this week in the United States Congress. There's one called HR 4335. And we're so used to nothing happening in Congress that this is actually a really satisfying bill to tell you about. Representative Carolyn Maloney of New York, whose office has kindly been in contact with Daily Cloud in the past, she introduced this bill, she sponsored it, and it passed under suspension of the rules. We don't usually like that because it usually means bypassing democracy. But in this case, it passed 384-7, so huge support. And what does it do? It's a short bill, but it basically closes a loophole. And I think a lot of people on both sides of the political divide will say this is a good bill. It closes a loophole so that executives and directors in a corporation or in a publicly traded company, officers and directors cannot trade securities in anticipation of a current report. In other words, it spells out that if something happens in a company between the time that it happens and the directors know about it and the time there's a public report, a report from the company to everyone else saying that it happened, you can't trade. So it basically closes a loophole that allowed for a lot of insider trading, basically, like legal insider trading. Like if you're, a giant steel company and you know that you did a giant deal to sell steel to China, and there's 6 weeks between the time that you sign that contract and the time that there's a public report about that deal and a press release to the press, you can't any longer buy steel, tell your friends to buy steel, tell people who are involved in that deal to buy steel. And I'm getting a lot of comments, and I'll return to them in the discussion section of this broadcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and commenting. I hear you, I see you, and I promise to get to you. So if you like that bill, if you like the idea of closing loopholes, this is one of those moments where you really can be very powerful in a democracy. Tweet Carolyn Maloney. She needs to hear from you. And if you don't like it, tweet Carolyn Maloney. If you want there to be more loopholes and more insider trading, tweet her as well. But often what we found is that elected officials will really pass a very good bill, but nobody ever hears about it, right? The media is set up to do horse races or gotcha journalism. So it's time for you to reward lawmakers who actually clean things up. If you like that bill, tweet Carolyn Maloney. There's another really interesting one, which I want to call your attention to, in which Betsy DeVos, who is the education secretary, had weakened accountability for online universities that rip people off. Basically, this is a huge scandal in the United States. You might not have heard of it if you're not in the United States, but a lot of people know that veterans tragically are targeted by these online universities. They can't afford, the $60,000 or whatever to go to a traditional university. So they try to get their degrees from these online universities. And there's been a lot of exposés that so many of these are really ripping people off, ripping students off, taking their money, which is often government money in the case of veterans, and not really giving them any kind of education. So Betsy DeVos had limited the ability of students to get their money back if they're ripped off by these digital education companies, so that now only 3% of the students who had their money stolen get their money back now that Betsy DeVos has had her way. So this is a resolution that that basically says that Congress disapproves of this. We don't like it. And again, it's just a resolution. It doesn't do much to scold or punish her. She's still Secretary of Education, but it's basically saying we don't approve of it, and we are going to make this unworkable. And I would also say, people say it doesn't matter who you vote for. We're not partisan, but I do think a bill like that, which doesn't get any headlines at all, which basically says, we're going to stick up for students who are being ripped off by digital online universities that are taking veterans' money under the guise of educating them and not delivering a decent education, that I would say in a nonpartisan way, that's a good bill. That's the kind of bill that we should be supporting. So again, share this bill, tweet the bill sponsor if you like it, and if you don't like it, have your say as well. And now there's the heart of our update for today. You all know, and I'm sure have been following the impeachment procedures, and you may agree or not agree with impeachment, but I really want you to know about this letter from the Government Accountability Office, which is buried in kind of records around the impeachment hearings. It's from the Office of Management and Budget, and it's about withholding of Ukraine security assistance. So when we read the impeachment articles of impeachment, we're nonpartisan, but they spelled out pretty clearly that you're not supposed to abuse your power as president, and that is an impeachable offense. And again, it's not a partisan view. It just is true. The founders said one reason the American people can impeach a president, Democrat or Republican, Green or Socialist, is if that president abuses his or her power. So by the same token, if you drill down into this letter from the OMB, from the Government Accountability Office about the OMB, you will hear an office that is tasked with making sure that there is accountability for what happens in government, that the rules are followed, right? Which is so important in a democracy, even if it sounds boring. What we're seeing in Australia is that all of those accountability rules have been gutted. So there's a government and an election, but there's zero accountability, right? So this office is supposed to make sure that everyone who works in the American government is accountable. So they wrote a very, very serious letter 4 days ago, January 16th, 2020. And what they said was, in the summer of 2019, the Office of Management and Budget withheld from obligation funds appropriated to the Department of Defense for security assistance to Ukraine. So this is not on the level of politicians warring. This is on the level of straight bureaucrats trying to do their jobs. So bear with me. This is one of those things that sounds really nerdy and in the weeds, but it's very important. So here are the straight up career bureaucrats at the OMB saying, at the Government Accountability Office saying the OMB didn't follow the rules, all right? In order to withhold the funds, OMB issued a series of 9 apportionment schedules with footnotes that made all unobligated balances unavailable for obligation. This group of civil servants is saying that group of civil servants created a new structure with footnotes to withhold a bunch of money that was supposed to be appropriated, that had been appropriated by Congress. So again, this is like deep proof, right? This is in the weeds proof of the execution of an unconstitutional process of withholding Ukraine money. Faithful execution of the law does not permit the president to substitute his own policy priorities for those that Congress has enacted into law. Why this is so important? It's not Nancy Pelosi. It's not Chuck Schumer. It's boring bureaucrat, career bureaucrat saying the law does not allow for this to happen. This is against the rules. It's against the law. As much as any president would like to say, these are my priorities, you can't do it. Our system does not work this way. OMB withheld funds for a policy reason, which is not permitted under the Impoundment Control Act. The withholding was not a programmatic delay. Therefore, we conclude that OMB violated the ICA. All right. So these are not Democrats. I can't stress this enough. These are people saying this is not how our jobs are supposed to work. Digest. In the summer of 2019, the Office of Management and Budget withheld from obligation funds appropriated to DoD for security assistance. The decision, they withheld $214 million appropriated to DoD for security assistance to Ukraine. And then they footnoted. OMB withheld amounts by issuing a series of 9 apportionment schedules with footnotes that made all unobligated balances for Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative unavailable for obligation. So remember, the president had kind of said what's at issue in the impeachment hearings is, did the president condition assistance on certain actions by the Ukrainian leader? So these bureaucrats are saying, here in this boring little document, a bunch of footnotes guaranteed that money that had been allocated by Congress to help Ukraine could not get there. As explained below, we conclude that OMB withheld the funds from obligation for an unauthorized reason in violation of the ICA, the law that manages allocations. We also question actions regarding funds appropriated to the Department of State for security assistance to Ukraine. OMB removed the footnote from the apportionment for the USAI funds on September 12, 2019. OMB response at 2. And I'm leaving out all of the citations, but it's fully cited, and you can take a look for yourself. Prior to their expiration, Congress then rescinded and reappropriated the funds. All right, so this had been a back and forth at least once. In accordance with our regular practice, we contacted OMB, the Executive Office of the President, and DoD to seek factual information and their legal views on this matter. So this is a bunch of freaked out bureaucrats at the Government Accountability Office. Again, not Democratic appointees, not Republican appointees, going, what the heck is going on here? We can't do this. This footnote keeps pulling back the money that is supposed to be allocated, and it's our job to allocate it. And then they cite all these letters. OMB provided a written response letter and certain apportionment schedules for security assistance funding for Ukraine. And then they attach that letter. The Executive Office of the President responded to our request by referring to the letter we had received from OMB and providing that the White House did not plan to send a separate response. So here, the Congressional Accountability Office, the Government Accountability Office, is getting the runaround from the president. We've contacted DoD regarding its response several times, and then they add all of these citations. Thus far, DoD officials have not provided a response or a timeline for when we will receive one. So here are these freaked out bureaucrats going, we're just trying to do our job. We're checking with defense. We're checking with OMB. We're checking with the president, and no one is giving us the documentation we need to make sure that this is lawful, that they're just clawing back this money. Background. For fiscal year 2019, Congress appropriated $250 million for Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. The funds were available, quote, to provide assistance, including training, equipment, lethal assistance, logistics support, supplies and services, sustainment and intelligence support to the military and national security forces of Ukraine. And they made the funds available through September 30th, 2019. DoD was required to notify Congress 15 days in advance of any obligation of the USIA funds. In order to obligate more than 50%, DoD was also required to certify to Congress that Ukraine had, quote, taken substantial actions on, quote, defense institutional reforms. Lots of citations. On May 23rd, 2019, DoD provided this certification to Congress. In other words, DoD said, okay, we're good to go. Send the money to Ukraine. And then they add that letter. And then they add, these poor bureaucrats are saying, note that similar copies had been provided to the Congressional Defense Committees and the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. So they're like, everyone saw this letter. DoD was good to go. They wanted to write the checks. In its certification, DoD included descriptions of its planned expenditures of $125 million. On July 25th, 2019, OMB issued the first of 9 apportionment schedules with footnotes withholding USAI funds from obligation. This footnote read, I love these bureaucrats. They're reading the footnotes and they're going, wait, this is not kosher. Amounts apportioned but not yet obligated as of the date of this reapportionment for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative are not available for obligation until August 5th, 2019, to allow for an interagency process to determine the best use of such funds. Based on OMB's communication with DoD, OMB understands from the department that this brief pause in obligations will not preclude DoD's timely execution of the final policy direction. DoD may continue its planning and casework for the initiative during this period. So they're basically saying in a footnote, you're not getting it, and there's going to be a delay because of a process. And then on both August 6th and 15th, OMB approved additional apportionment actions to extend this, quote, pause in obligations. And when, civil service bureaucrats are putting things in scare quotes, it's bad. The footnotes from these additional apportionment actions were otherwise identical. They nevertheless differed in that they omitted the second sentence that appeared in the early apportionment actions regarding OMB's understanding that the pause would not preclude timely obligation. And then they quote from the footnote. And then basically they're saying they held up the money. And then at issue in this decision is whether OMB had the authority to withhold the USAI funds from obligation. And then their discussion, they get right into the heart of what does the Constitution say. The Constitution specifically vests Congress with the power of the purse, providing that, quote, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. And then they cite the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution also vests all legislative powers in Congress and sets forth the procedures of bicameralism and presentment, two houses, right, through which the president may accept or veto a bill passed by both houses of Congress, and Congress may subsequently override a presidential veto. An extraordinary sentence. It's basically reminding everyone how the United States government and system and democracy is supposed to work. There are two houses. There's a constitution. The president is not vested with the power to ignore or amend any such duly acted law. And then they cite a case, C. Clinton versus City of New York. Quote, the Constitution does not authorize the president to, quote, enact, to amend, or to repeal statutes. Instead, he must, quote, faithfully execute the law as Congress enacts it. Again, citing the Constitution. Right? An appropriation act is a law like any other. Like, listen to these bureaucrats going, wait a minute, I'm shaking you by the collar. Therefore, unless Congress has enacted a law providing otherwise, the president must take care to ensure that appropriations are prudently obligated during their period of availability. You can't throw in these random, scary pauses while you negotiate or whatever is at stake, right? In fact, Congress was concerned about the failure to prudently obligate according to its congressional prerogatives when it enacted and later amended the ICA. Like, Congress has already been worried about executives stealing the power of the purse from Congress. That's why this rule about appropriation says you've got to deliver the money. So the Constitution grants the president no unilateral authority to withhold funds from obligation. They're repeating themselves for clarity. And then a citation. Instead, Congress has vested the president with strictly circumscribed authority to impound or withhold budget authority only in limited circumstances, as expressly provided in the ICA. And then they say there are ways that you can intervene. The president may temporarily withhold funds from obligation, but not beyond the end of the fiscal year in which the president transmits the special message by proposing a deferral. So they're saying in narrow circumstances, the president can delay funds, but this did not apply. In either case, the president must transmit, says the ICA rule, a special message to Congress that includes the amount of budget authority proposed for deferral or rescission and the reason for the proposal. So they're saying, yes, in some cases, the president can delay delivering that money as Congress allocated it, but there's a process he has to go through. He has to make a special message to Congress, which he hasn't done. The burden to justify a withholding of budget authority rests with the executive branch. And then I'll zip to the end. They're very scathing. They said in no way did the president do that here. The ICA does not permit deferrals for policy reasons. Thus, the deferral of USIA funds was improper under the ICA. This is passionate. When Congress enacts appropriations, it has provided budget authority that agencies must obligate in a manner consistent with law. However, once enacted, the president must, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And has no constitutional or common law existence or authority, but only those authorities conferred upon it by Congress. So this is a bunch of bureaucrats kind of frantically citing the law, citing the Constitution, citing the law, citing the Constitution, basically to repeat versions of the same thing, which is no president is above the law. The Congress has the power of the purse. You can't bypass or make up the law. So, and it's very straightforward language. OMB asserts that its actions are not subject to the ICA because they constitute a programmatic delay. And, that's the gibberish. And these civil servants say OMB's assertions have no basis in law. We recognize that even where the president does not transmit a special message, it's possible that a delay in obligation may not constitute a reportable impoundment. But they said this doesn't count here where there was no external factor causing an unavoidable delay. Furthermore, DOD had already produced a plan for expending the funds. So this is very serious. They're saying, once again, this did not, fit under those narrow exceptions. But anyway, the Department of Defense already had purposes it needed the money for that were military. And, you've got to think about what this means if a president just says, you know what, I don't care what the Department of Defense or any department has already planned to do with this money that Congress has allocated. I'm just going to, put in a little sluice here in the money chute and redirect the funds the way I want to punish or reward who I want or for the purposes that I want. You could really put soldiers in danger. You could put, our men and women in uniform in danger if they're expecting appropriations. It's $125 million in Ukraine or in other conflict areas around the world and not getting it. So then it goes into foreign military financing, which is sort of a separate but equally serious issue. And then the conclusion, OMB violated the ICA when it withheld DOD's USAI funds from obligation for policy reasons. This impoundment of budget authority was not a programmatic delay. They're repeating themselves, but I'm repeating it to show how passionately Thomas Armstrong, General Counsel of the Government Accountability Office, is. OMB and state have failed as of yet to provide the information we need to fulfill our duties under the ICA regarding these funds. We will continue to pursue this matter and will provide our decision to Congress after we've received the necessary information. So they're saying politely, we're still being stonewalled. We consider a reluctance to provide a fulsome response to have constitutional significance. Let me read that again. And again, don't be put off or dismayed by the language. It gets easier and easier the more you're used to it. We consider a reluctance to provide a fulsome, he means in this case, complete, expansive response to have constitutional significance. In other words, the fact that the Government Accountability Office is being stonewalled by the executive, so it can't hand over a check to the DOD the way Congress intended, they're saying that matters at the level of a constitutional issue or crisis, right? GAO's role under the ICA, the law, to provide information and legal analysis to Congress as it performs oversight of executive activity is essential to ensuring respect for and allegiance to Congress's constitutional power of the purse. All federal officials and employees take an oath to uphold and protect the Constitution and its core tenets, including the congressional power of the purse. We trust that state and OMB will provide the information needed. And then he signs off Thomas H. Armstrong, General Counsel. There are a bunch of footnotes, and that's the end of that letter from the government, the lawyer of the government, U.S. Government Accountability Office about this issue of the president withholding $125 million allocated by Congress to Ukraine. So just to summarize, I really hope, thank you for bearing with me as always, as I read this initially seemingly difficult language. You see that it's really not difficult, right? You see what's happening. I think it's very clear, but to me, just speaking from my heart, a letter like this from a lawyer at the Government Accountability Office, right? Straight up bureaucrats, where they're saying, we all took an oath to protect the Constitution. It's more moving to me and more persuasive that there's a problem than any amount of posturing from Democrats and Republicans, which I think we can agree have all been very unseemly. But this is truly statesmanlike, I would say, and this is truly I wish these people were actually running the country. I mean, all the bureaucrats have been really impressive in this, more impressive than the electeds. They're really saying it's not insignificant that we can't do our jobs. It's not insignificant that the Army and the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines are left without money that the people's representatives allocated to them in the budget illegally. And it's not insignificant that the president did not obey the law. And I think it's very, very significant that a nonpartisan entity, the Government Accountability Office, whose job is to really oversee the executive and make sure that Congress gets to do its job, they don't change from administration to administration. They're there for the long haul. They're career civil servants, and they are saying this is not legal. So you can decide, we're nonpartisan. You have your own opinion, as you should, on what's right or what's wrong with the impeachment hearings. But I just feel like reading that letter and embedding it, which we'll do, is really, really important. You may or may not agree with me that the fact that civil servants whose job is transparency are so upset that they're reminding the president and the State Department how the Constitution works. But to me, it's a more important piece of evidence than any amount of posturing. All right, so that was our This Week in Congress. And again, I urge you to give a gift of a $24.99 monthly vertical into your inbox about whatever the issue is that you care about: real estate, finance, reproductive rights, family law, environment, solar power, right? It all can come into you, straight into you. And we've tried to make it as affordable as possible. Other people like LexisNexis, they charge hundreds and hundreds of dollars, Bloomberg, hundreds and hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars for similar data services. So please consider sharing that. It's the gift of democracy. All right. If you have just tuned in for This Week in Congress, we're now done, and have a great week, rest of your week. And if you want to stay for the chat, let's go to it. Barry Atkinson, hello, says good morning, afternoon. Good morning to you, Barry. Thanks always for your support. And by the way, I want to thank Patreon members who have signed up. We want to thank them by name, and we'll add their names in a thank you to this video. We're offering that now as a benefit for our Patreon supporters. So we've got 5 new Patreon patrons, Ann Bateman, Charles Pixley, and others whose names I'll add when we put together all of the new Patreon patrons in the thank you. Al Moda reports, hi, Naomi, you are terrific. Thank you. I admire you and your work. The 5G cell towers are going up all over the country with no testing or oversight. They will be extremely hazardous to everyone. Al Moda, if you follow Daily Clout, we agree with you. Again, a nonpartisan issue. We've done some very serious reporting on the 5G towers and on the legislation that has indeed handed over U.S. government sites and schools and post offices to the telecom companies for under market rates to put up 5G cell receptors, which many international physicians and scientists are warning are measurably hazardous to people's health. And people are reporting symptoms around these cell towers, including quite serious ones. They've been shown to cause changes in people's cells that appear to be precancerous. People get headaches, they get vertigo, they have sleep disruptions, just like smart meters, and they are not tested. And we've been communicating with Environmental Health Trust, which is a very respected lobby for citizens and consumers in Washington. And they've been very good about explaining to us and giving us information to publicize about how much scientific evidence there is that the telecoms don't want you to know about, for the lack of oversight and the lack of testing. They said basically that this new technology is rolling out and there's no one home in the agencies that are supposed to be testing it and making sure that it's safe. So I am completely persuaded that these are very dangerous. And the other thing I would like to point out, I've pointed it out before, is that they're also dangerous in case a hostile power, hacks into our grid. Because if you've got cell towers literally every few hundred feet, you can use them, you can weaponize them. You can turn them up so high that people are injured or communications are disrupted. I mean, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know the details of that, but it stands to reason that a network every few hundred feet of a magnetic field that can disrupt measurably animals and birds and humans' kind of biological processes is a very dangerous thing when it comes to national security. So it's a bad idea. And we do, a lot of our Daily Clout members want best practices to ban these cell towers. I do want to say we've had wonderful citizen reporting from Northern California, where they did manage to pass a bill that's not fantastic, but that at least limits 5G towers to retail areas downtown and bans them in residential areas. And I will repost that model legislation so people can imitate it in their own communities. All right. Thank you for your comments about that. Smile Morphone says, we've all seen this. Joe Biden brags about getting Ukrainian prosecutor fired. It's all just a circus. I hear you. No divide and conquer. What's the status of 5G in New York City? That's a great question. It's my understanding that New York is one of the 30 cities that has rolled out 5G. And honestly, I feel like people have been much more stressed and irritable in New York since the rollout of 5G. Of course, that's a totally unscientific observation, but I think it stresses people out, as it would, right? It's not a place on the spectrum that we evolved to be near. Barry Atkinson, all elected politicians should be licensed, like doctors, lawyers, CPAs, hairstylists. If they don't pass, they don't run. Violation of oaths, then removed and loss of license. Barry, I hear you, and I agree with you. I don't know if I agree with licensing, because I like everyone to run for office, but our founders were so wise. They left really easy articles of impeachment for anyone who's corrupt. And what most people don't know, and I didn't know it till I read what is impeachment and read the laws around impeachment. Impeachment isn't just for presidents. The founders intended for us to impeach everyone, who is serving in an elected capacity, and not just for high crimes and misdemeanors, but for really a very low bar of corruption, bribery, corruption, conflicts of interest. We're supposed to impeach them. We're supposed to get rid of them very easily. And if you go to our video library, you'll see what a low bar it is. So that is kind of a license, right? We're supposed to really be active in getting rid of people who are in the least bit corrupt. So I want to just include our Australian friends in this discussion because over the last few weeks, it's been really clear that they no longer have in their system, in their democratic toolkit, an ability to get rid of corrupt politicians, except through electing another group, which really is no way to keep that group from being corrupt. So, we're thinking of putting together a democracy toolkit. And I can tell you one of the things you need for a functioning democracy, which right now Australia does not have, is the ability to get rid of your politicians if they're corrupt, and for everyone to know what steps to take to get rid of a corrupt politician. Also, I would say the ability to charge them with crimes. I mean, one of the things I've been asking Australia is, how has no one brought charges against the prime minister, who appears to be letting the nation burn to the ground and not taking a proper duty of care to get firefighting airplanes, for instance, as one of our commentators, John D., has proven from foreign countries to help put out the fires. And it's been difficult to understand because there's plenty of lawsuits that are brought against presidents as soon as they're out of office, and certainly threatened while they're in office. But no president or prime minister should be above the law, and using the law is one of the ways to keep elected officials from being completely corrupt. All right, Victrola 13 says, they deleted a comment from me this morning, right before my eyes. That's shocking. And No Divide and Conquer says, thank you for your work. No Divide and Conquer, thank you. And I will be shameless and ask everyone to consider supporting Daily Clout. You can go on Patreon for $2, for $3.99. You can be a member. We have $10 a month members. We have $20 a month members, as little or as much as you can. I've gotten used to asking this because we have fixed costs. It costs $10,000 a year just to provide you with the data that goes into BuildCam. And it also costs money for developers to keep our platform running, researchers, webmasters, and hosts. I hope it looks seamless, but a lot of talented people and a lot of fixed costs go into keeping the lights on in Daily Clout. And we're growing and growing. We reached almost 100,000 video views, but it really, and I'm honored to serve you, but if you can just, shoot that 1 cup of coffee a month to us, the cost of it, or, make a $10 or $20 a month or $50 a month donation, it goes so far to make sure that we're going to be able to keep reporting and bringing you these primary documents in this website and this bill cam. Downloadable community resolution against 5G on 5gcrisis.org. Thank you, Victrola. That is a great resource. And if you would consider shooting it to me at naomi@dailyclout.io, I'll upload it so everyone can see it on our website. That's exactly how we should be working as a community bulletin board. Great job. Insurance company, No Divide and Conquer asks who programs the voting machines and who counts the votes. Really important question and really worth a separate video or series of videos. It's come up before. There's a strong movement in America that says that electronic voting machines, who are produced by Diebold often, which had ties to the Bush administration, is hackable, and you don't get a receipt, right? So that in a contested election, you can't prove who you voted for. So there's a big movement for going back to paper ballots. And I would also add to that, there should be a movement to photograph your ballot so that a third-party platform can upload all the ballots of people who volunteer to have their vote counted in a contested election. So there's a lot of important activity around that, but we've seen some ugly things since we've been reporting on this issue that people really are not aware of. For instance, in Britain, they just had an election. But there was a Scottish referendum in 2014, and 400 different voters got invalid ballots in the districts that were more likely to vote for Scottish secession, right? And we at Daily Clout tabulated all 400 with eyewitness reports, people naming themselves. They really stepped up as citizens. And it was this clear pattern of tampering with the vote, or at least effectively not having a counted vote in critical areas. And then when we tried to find out who's responsible for counting the vote in Britain, it's shocking. There's something called an electoral commission. They're not responsible for counting the vote. They're a government agency, and they issued a report saying that the protections around democracy and vote counting in Britain are inadequate. So they referred me to the police, and the police are not responsible for counting the vote. They referred me to the local council, and the local council are not responsible for counting the vote. They referred me back to the Electoral Commission. So it was a complete circle, and people had to figure out in real time, how do we file an action to stop everything and count a contested vote? Because the referendum, so many people's votes were ruined and postal votes were ruined that it was, a lot of people felt an invalid result. And by the time they found out, with our help, like calling our contacts in the Scottish Parliament to find out what the procedure was, which you shouldn't have to do, right? It should be right there in black and white online, or, available to everyone. We found out that you needed to come up with £25,000 to start a judicial process to stop everything to count the vote. So that is not a healthy democracy, right? We're going from country to country and kind of kicking the tires and seeing where citizens are totally disenfranchised, even though it looks like a modern democracy, which is really kind of the state of the art for democracies all over the West and the global North these days. They look like democracies, and you really don't know until you kick the tires that there's no one counting the vote who's accountable, or that, they've made the act of appealing to a judge to stop everything and count the vote cost £25,000, right? So we're in the business now of informing people where their democracies are vulnerable and what they can do about it. But you're quite right. Every single citizen in every single democracy of the 132 democracies around the world needs to be able to know who counts the vote in a contested election and how they can protect their vote. In America, we have horrible reports in every election. I mean, leaving out Cambridge Analytica, right? Just plain old voter suppression, especially in communities of color that tend to vote Democratic. Horrible, long lines by design, right? Or, things closing or things breaking or people being intimidated or asked to come up with, extra ID or all kinds of ways of delaying or deferring voters. And legal ways of keeping people from voting, like saying, well, if you broke the law once, if you're a felon, you can never vote again. So all of us in a democracy now, everywhere around the world, have to say no more of this, right? We're going to make it easy for people to vote. We're going to find out best practices to count the vote, and we're going to make sure there's someone accountable. And we'll be your partner. If you want to do that in your country, we'll do everything we can to help you, to shine a light on it, to keep an archive like we're going to do for Australia of, best practices and what needs work and, primary documents showing you what your rights are so that you're not subjected to waking up and finding out your vote hasn't been counted, or you're scrambling like citizens were in 2014 to find out, like, what's the process? And there's a lot of disinformation when citizens try to find out what's the process, right? So we want to be the place that everyone can tune in and say, what does it say? What are the rules? If someone needs to count the vote in Australia, or there's no legitimate FOIA system in Australia, or Scottish voters don't know who to ask to count the vote if so many have been disenfranchised. I hope you like that mission. So it's been 45 minutes. No divide and conquer says, I totally agree. There's no power in voting as long as there's no transparency in counting the votes. This issue should be primary. Totally agree. Everything you do goes up in smoke if you don't have accountability in counting the votes. You're 100% right. And we all need to go back to or include that as square one and not assume that our votes are being transparently counted. And I say that as I was an advisor for Al Gore in 2000 when there were arguments about how to count the votes, and no one kind of knew what is standard practice, and the hanging chads, and so much confusion was generated by the Bush people intentionally around what are normal processes for counting votes, what votes count. That should never happen again. Seems the voting machine algorithm and counting issue should trump all others. Many people agree with you. So we've all had a really productive 45 minutes. I hope that you guys have a lot to think about. If you're in the United States, I really, really hope you'll think about that letter from the Government Accountability Office and what it means for our democracy. And if you like closing loopholes for insider trading, now you know about Carolyn Maloney's, I think, really good bill. Give her a thumbs up. Or if you don't like it, tell her it sucks. That's up to you. Now you know about what's going on in Australia. They need better FOIA systems. They are waiting for 8 water bombers that the U.S. Forestry Service has said are available. If you're in Australia, now you're empowered. You know that. You can badger Scott Morrison. You can badger my friend Angus Taylor. You can badger the Home Office, and we'll house your primary archives here at Daily Cloud Australia, which we're going to give a permanent place to. If you're in Scotland or Britain, you know that there's no one counting your votes who's accountable, and that it's going to be expensive to start a judicial process if the next vote is contested. So that's something to work on. And we're here to support you in your journey to be powerful, powerful citizens and make and shape the world that you and your friends and neighbors believe in and want, rather than distant oligarchs. So have a wonderful week. Remember to support us. Remember to subscribe. Remember to give a gift. And remember to sign up if you want a vertical on the brand new BillCam 3.0. This is Naomi Wolf, CEO of Daily Cloud, and I'm so happy to talk to you. Bye-bye.